Take our lips and speak through them. Take our hearts and see through them. Take our souls and set them on fire. Today we have in our gospel a story about extravagance. Last week we had a story about extravagance. You may recall that it was one of these kind of once upon a time fairyland type stories. It was one of Jesus' parables, where he said there was once this man who had two sons. And this foolish man, in the prime of his life, at the bidding of his younger son, decided to take all of his property, all of his possessions, basically his whole future, and to divide it up into two parts, and give one to his elder son, and the other part to his younger son. The elder son was the responsible. The younger son took this gift of love and life from his father, and in a very short time had wasted it and thrown it away on shameful living. And then he came back home. And the father does another shamefully extravagant act, and he welcomes the younger son home with open arms. No questions asked. No judgments given, no punishment. Just open arms with joy and celebration. And as I mentioned, all of Jesus' listeners would have regarded him as a fool, as a shameless fool. And yet, his extravagance, his actions, turned out to make him the hero of the story. And today we have another story of extravagance, but this isn't a fairy tale, this isn't a parable. This happened, and it happened to Jesus. Passover was getting near, the third Passover that John records in his gospel. And lots of Jews are traveling to Jerusalem. They're trying to get there early for Passover so that they can go through the prescribed rituals of purification, so that they can be ready to celebrate Passover, so that they can be allowed to participate. Jesus comes along in the crowd, but he doesn't go to Jerusalem first. Instead, he stops at a village on the outskirts of Jerusalem, in Bethany. It's a home of some close friends of his, Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, their brothers and sisters. And there's a meal that's given in his honor. Martha puts the meal together. Lazarus reclines at the table with Jesus. And so they are actually doing this meal in typical Roman fashion. There are low tables, there are cushions on the floor, and they're reclining on one arm as they eat from the table. And then something extraordinary happens. Lazarus' sister Mary comes in. She comes up to Jesus and she kneels down at his feet. And she takes a pound of costly perfume. Tens upon tens of thousands of dollars of perfume. Imported nard. The whole contents she pours on Jesus' feet. And then she proceeds to massage his feet and to work that perfume into his pores. We don't know how long she spent doing this. And then when she was done, she wiped the excess with her own hair. What extravagance. What devotion. What love she showed him. But why? turns out, Mary and Jesus have a bit of history together. Because in the previous chapter, Mary and Martha's brother Lazarus was ill, deathly ill. And Jesus was away at the time, and so Mary and Martha sent a message to Jesus saying, the one that you love is sick. But instead of responding to the message right away, he and the disciples hang out where they are for a couple more days. And then Jesus says, let's go back to Jerusalem. Well, the disciples are against this idea because people have already begun to conspire about how they might kill Jesus. And they remind him of this. And he says, well, we got to go back because Lazarus is sleeping. In fact, he's dead. So they make their way back to Bethany. And as they're arriving, Martha sees Jesus, and she goes up to him and says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, he will give you. Then they have this conversation about Jesus being the resurrection and the life. And then Martha leaves Jesus there, and she runs back to the house to get Mary. Mary is there grieving and mourning, and the community is around her grieving and mourning. And Martha whispers to Mary, the Lord's here. So she gets up and leaves the house. Everybody thinks that she's going to the tomb, so they get up to follow her to the tomb. And she meets Jesus on the road, and she says the exact same thing. She kneels at his feet and says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have died. And Jesus sees her weeping at his feet, sees everybody else weeping. And he says, well, then where is he? Where have you laid him? They say, come, Lord, we'll show you. And in that moment, Jesus himself is overcome by grief. And he weeps with them. And we know the story. Jesus arrives in the tomb. He calls forth Lazarus. Lazarus comes forth alive again. And this is the last of Jesus' big miracles, big signs in the Gospel of John. And it's, in a sense, a miracle of extravagance. I mean, it was one thing for Jesus to feed 5,000 people with just a few loaves of fish and to have leftovers. It was another thing for Jesus at the wedding in Cana, when the wine had run out, to produce 120 to 180 gallons of new wine out of water. Clearly more than they needed. Raising a dead man back to life. That's extravagant. And it gets him in trouble. Because people, if you thought they believed in him before, now they really believe in him. And this is now cause of concern for the Pharisees and for those who are in power. Because Passover is near. And if Jesus walks into Jerusalem on the National Day of Independence with a following, the Romans are going to stand for it. And they were going to come in and they were going to destroy this place. That's what the Jewish council said. And so they decide that they need to find a way to get Jesus and to kill him. So Jesus goes into hiding for a while. And then we come to today. Passover is 6 days away. The people are wondering if Jesus is going to come out from hiding because they know the authorities are looking for him. So he makes an appearance in the home of Lazarus at this supper where Mary comes in. And in this act of love and devotion, in this act of intimacy, massages his feet, cares for him, uses way more oil, way more perfume than you would ever need her devotion, I think it's the smell of her gratitude for having her brother back. How can you pay Jesus back for bringing a beloved one back to life? But she tries. And this smell of perfume that fills the room doesn't smell sweet to everybody. To Judas, it smells like stench. And he's offended. He's offended at the waste. He's offended by the extravagance of this act. Why wasn't this perfume sold for 300 denarii and the proceeds given to the poor? Now our narrator says, Judas didn't care about the poor. He used to steal from the common purse. What do we do with our gratitude? Because as Jesus says to Judas, she's done this extraordinary thing because you only have me for a little while. If you want to give to the poor, you will always have them with you, but she only has me for a little while. And so she has done this for me. But what do we do with our gratitude? When we look back over our lives and we look at those times where God has showered His love and grace upon us, where God has brought parts of our lives back from the dead. And we have this love and this devotion for Jesus that we want to show, but Jesus, His body, is not here. How do we show our love and devotion in extravagant ways? Well, I think we have a clue in what Jesus says to Judas. You always have the poor with you. Kindness to them anytime. In fact, in the 5th century, St. Augustine in North Africa, in writing about this story, talks about how we can share in Mary's generosity, how we can show her love and devotion to Jesus by showing that same love and devotion that she did to Jesus' feet, and do it for those in our world who we know are struggling in one way or another. He writes, anoint the feet of Jesus by living a good life. Wipe them with your hair. What you have in excess give to the poor, and then you have wiped the feet of the Lord. For the hair seems superfluous to you, but necessary for the feet of the Lord. Perhaps on earth the Lord's feet are still in need. And so when you do for the least of these, says Jesus, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, befriending the lonely, visiting the prisoner, when you take care of the least of these, then you have spent what was superfluous for yourselves, but you have done what was grateful to my feet. Perhaps on earth the Lord's feet are still in need. So maybe we can't pay Jesus back for the extravagance that He has showered upon us. But we can certainly pay it forward to those who are dear to Jesus' heart, to those who are struggling. I know as a parent, somebody can do something nice and kind for me. And that's quite meaningful. But when they do something nice and kind for one of my children, I can't express what that feels like. And I think it's the same for God. I think what God would have us do is think about those times when He has provided for us, when He has showered His grace upon us, and in the gratitude Some of those feet need some mentoring. Some of those feet just need a companion to walk along with them for a while. But find those feet, and then find a way to be extravagant